For my 18th birthday, my mum and dad organised a trip to Ireland for me and my two friends. My dad's family had immigrated to Canada after the Second World War, and my mum also had some Irish blood, so it was always a dream of mine to visit the old country to gain a greater connection with our cultural past. My dad actually still has relatives in Belfast, in the far north of Ireland, which is actually still part of the UK, and still keeps in touch with them, so a big part of the trip was connecting with these relatives, having them show us around, treating us to some traditional Irish stuff like Guinness and more Guinness. So after about a week or so of touring the Dublin and Limerick and Cork, we headed up north via train to stay with my distant cousins in Belfast. The meet-up wasn't scheduled until the early evening, and it was still quite early in the morning when our train arrived. So me and my two friends ended up having some time to kill. Turns out Belfast is pretty damn cool, with a lot of stuff to see and do. So we had no worries about keeping occupied until the evening. So we're out doing a little shopping and seeing some sights, when this young looking guy walks up to us out of nowhere and strikes up a conversation. Being young girls, a cute Irish guy talking to us turned us into blushing idiots. He's telling us how he's not from Belfast and he's only in town to do a music video shoot for his band. This now turns the following factor up to 11, and we're practically drooling over this tattooed guy as he regales us with tales of tours, bus, antiques and wild ass rock shows. Eventually, to our absolute delight and amazement, he tells us we're all gorgeous and that will be perfect to start in their music video with them. He explained it would be like a group thing, with the band playing in the abandoned warehouse space while their fans partying around them. So when he asks us, we have an hour or two to spare to come and be a part of the shoot. We jump at the chance. He asks us to follow him, and without so much as a second thought, we did. But here's the thing. We've always been a good judge of character, and something didn't feel quite right to me. I don't know what it was at the time, but something just didn't add up. I also know a little bit about guitars. Having played for a few years in high school, I'm not amazing or anything, but I do know my way around a fretboard. So when the guy says he plays guitar in his band, I asked him which model and brand he prefers. He hesitated. Then he gave us some wishy-washy answer about having too many favourites to choose from. Okay, nothing quite so suspicious about that. The guy might have had a whole bunch of guitars on hand, but I pressed the issue. I asked him if he'd ever played a guitar Les Paul, and he honestly looks at me like I was speaking Greek. My bullcrap detector is going off the scales at that. Everyone who plays guitar has some dream setup in mind, some god-tier piece of gear that they've long had placed on a pedestal. This guy had nothing. In fact, I was starting to think he knew nothing about guitars at all. I think he actually began to notice my suspicion, and he caused him to drop a little of that happy-go-lucky disposition of his. The guy actually started walking much faster through the crowds, turning round every so often to tell us to hurry up, or we'll be late for the shoot. I turned to the girls around this time to tell them that I really didn't like where this was going. While they understood my concerns, they just thought I was being over-paranoid, that I should relax and see where this adventure would take us. But when we eventually led us all the way to this run-down looking warehouse building that did not look that all safe, they started getting similar vibes. The garbage everywhere, gnarly looking graffiti all over the walls. The place looked like it was a junkie's paradise. Remember, this is the middle of the day, and there is a crap ton of people around. Well, now we're way out of sight from the general public, with this shady goddamn stranger who I'm convinced is up to no good. On these iron entrance doors, he stops. He waits and tells us to go ahead of him. The other two girls are giggling, way excited for the prospect of staring in some foreign band music video, and just obey him like a pair of dumbasses. Girls, we're not going in there. We're leaving. The words seemed to leave my mouth before I even realized I spoke to them. At this point, the guy freaks out and stands between me and my friends, trying to block the exit from the warehouse. You can see the fury in his eyes. Whatever plan he had for us, I obviously just thrown a spanner in the works. He's so overcome with anger that as he hissing at me not to ruin this for him. Little flecks of spittle are flying from his lips and landed on me. It was so gross. So gross, in fact, and I actually leaned for a push, sent him flying off balance before I screamed at my friend to get the hell out of here. It takes him acting like a complete douche before my friends to realise just what a scumbag this guy was. And at that, we're running away from this warehouse like it's on fire. This guy's just yelling after us, shouting stuff about like not ruining this for him. It just makes us think. He's giving chase, so we run faster and faster until we're back among those throngs of people. Relatively safety. I couldn't believe how dumb we were, and I told the girls as much. We swore we wouldn't tell anyone about this. Not even our family, what we have done. I had no clue what surprise was waiting for us inside the filthy warehouse space. I realised in that moment how naive I was, and to listen to my new tune which has protected me many, many times throughout my life. What a pair of idiots we were. After our university graduation, a few friends and I decided to go travelling to Western Australia. We had planned the trip for years, putting away our savings from our part-time jobs until the day we finally donned our motorboard caps and ventured out into the world as adults. We arrived in country, spent a week or so just racing around the beaches and soaking up the sun. Then we decided to have ourselves a little road trip, and for that we need wheels. So we wandered into this little Aussie town and found ourselves the cheapest, noisiest camper van and rent the thing for basically pennies. We drove this battered old camper van around the few towns, often sleeping in the van itself. When we were unable to find any hostels or hotels, anyone familiar with the northwestern corner of Australia knows that town is pretty generous term for the most of these places, and there was a whole lot of absolutely nothing in between them, just barren out black desert. One night, after driving for hours and hours in almost pitch black darkness, we decided it'd be better to just pull over and get some sleep instead of risking getting lost in the outback. So we stop, drive off the road a little into this little dry patch of nowhere with no one around for miles and miles. We're tired, but we're happy. We're stocked up on food, cold beer, and now we've got ourselves a place to sleep. We got it made, so after an hour or so, around a warm fire, drinking and reminiscing about uni, we find ourselves staring up at the sky. It's an incredible vista, lack of light, pollution in that area of Australia. Means the starlight canopy is a truly mesmerising sight. But this place was settled into this ring of by trees, so that at some point someone has the bright idea to go for a little wander so we can have a better view of the stars. It wasn't hard to find a good spot. The only trees around were nestled between the hills, hiding from the sun and sucking up any water that flowed their way. Manage to drag yourself up off the slopes and you can see for miles and miles. I mean, Australia is so flat in places that it's like you're looking out of the end of the earth. So with all of us a little buzzed, we start shuffling off towards one of these hills. It was glorious. The Milky Way was so bright and deep, it felt like you were falling into it. The road and our campsite were hidden by darkness and trees, erasing pretty much any signs of civilization. We felt so alone, so far from home. It really was a special movement. We sat and drank in the galaxy and told whatever stories came to mind. Really real hippie stuff, and we were tiny specks in a immense universe, and everything was perfect. And then it was time to go. We all stand up as one of the four dudes started walking back in the wrong direction. It was not hard to understand why. Every hill looked the same from up on top of our glorious mounts of rocks and dirt. Every little valley was choked with brush. The road was observed from view, and it curved gently away from us both. Directions anyway. There were no landmarks, and we're all as high as kites. So there I am, confused at first as to why my mates are heading off in pretty much the opposite way we came. I doubt myself for a moment, wondering if it's me that in fact had messed up our sense of direction. The guys poke a bit of fun, saying I'm too drunk to find my way back to the van, but I know at this point that we're definitely not going the right way. I start insisting, raising my voice, trying to convince the lads that they're about to get themselves dangerously lost in a place where getting lost can be fatal. They're so certain now they're going the right way that my objections were often met with laughter and mockery. But as time went on, I became increasingly panicked. I could see this whole disastrous event unfolding before my eyes. So in a moment of clarity, I just turned around and headed back in the direction I knew was correct. Now, it was their turn to be insistent. The lads practically begged and pleaded me not to go back in the wrong direction, drunkenly arguing that I was going to get us all in a lot of trouble. That infuriated me. The only one with any idea of where we were, and I was being treated like a moron. Eventually they decided to humour me, following my lead, so they could continue to mock me when I finally did get us all lost. Every step of the way they pointed out how unfamiliar everything was, how I couldn't possibly be the way we came. One of the lads even started babbling about how we are going south when we wanted to go north. He didn't even have a compass on him. In fact, I'm pretty sure, even if he did, he still wouldn't be able to tell his arse from his elbow. They left broken twigs in a trail behind us so we could find our way back. An idea that would have served us a whole lot better an hour or two beforehand. One dude tried to physically drag me back to the hill and into the wilderness. They laughed at me, right up until we stepped out of a ditch and into the clearing where our camp was. They were laughing then. I can tell you that much, that the lad who was insistent he had some kind of pisshead magnet compass in his head was the worst off. He seemed flabbergasted, like the only explanation was that the camp had moved not that we had nearly gotten ourselves lost. I looked up this area later on Google Earth. Had we gone in any direction other than our direct way back to the road? We would have been over 120 miles before we hit any signs of civilization. If we were very, very lucky, 120 miles of Australian outback with no food or water or tools. We would have died, surely. It would only take a few days without water, without the body just packs in, and we were so dehydrated from the alcohol and smokes that I don't think we would have lasted a day alone out in the outback. And that's the story of why I don't hike with drunks anymore. I was 19 when I first landed in Ho Chi Minh City, Burial Ground, man. Before that, I'd never even left the UK, and Vietnam seemed like the most exotic place in the world for me. Feeling like Neil Armstrong landed on an alien planet, the humidity that hit me in the face as I stepped off the airplane was unbelievable. How people could live in that heat, I couldn't even imagine. But live they did, in tiny oriental streets and wide sunflower-lined avenues. Millions upon millions of Vietnamese made their way around the city on little mopeds and scooters. My cigarette-smoking taxi driver filled the car with thick fumes, beeping the horn so regularly that it could have been Morse code. I recoiled when he began bellowing viciously out the window in Vietnamese at any two-wheeler that came in too close. It was a sensory overload, alien sights and unfamiliar noises, exotic scents, both putrid and pleasurable. It was almost a relief to arrive at the small, dingy hostel I'll be staying in for a couple of nights. I quickly developed a taste of Vietnamese food, loud, vibrant flavours in some strangely familiar forms. Vietnamese food was pretty good too, yet it was the night that brought Saigon to life. Neon signs and bellowing speakers from shrines and temples. Vietnamese go-go dancers grating to lyrics they couldn't understand. Fried meat and incest filling the air with sweet, delicious smells. Street vendors sold fruits that looked like props from a science fiction movie. It was incredible, but maybe I got a little too confident in my new home away from home. So Vietnamese weed is cheap, like very bloody cheap. Not as strong as some of the stuff you can find in the UK and the States, but for the price it's fantastic. It's also readily available. You can walk up to some little Vietnamese dive bar and pay the bartender to nip out and grab you a bag. It's that easy. Only it's one night. My usual connection isn't in work. I try to ask the owner where the bartender is in my crappy Vietnamese, but he doesn't understand, so I give up and decide to find myself a new person to pick up from. Something you should know about Ho Chi Minh is not uncommon for someone on a moped or a scooter to just cruise up next to you on the pavement and offer you a lift somewhere. They'll be like, "Hey man, you want beer? Ladies? Weed?" Most people just laugh and decline politely, with a via the hustlers just taking it on the chin and shouting bye bye as they drive off. But when this dude rolls up and gives me the same routine, I nod and ask him if he can drive me somewhere to buy some smokes, and as I expected, he smiles, nods and tells me to hop on. After we're driving for about 15 minutes, I notice that we're actually heading out of the city centre. Not just that, but we seemed to be heading way out onto the suburbs, which is Vetemim, is basically just jungles with houses between fixed patches of foliage, and I didn't mind the journey really, as long as he didn't try and gouge me out for it. As you find much more quality stuff if you go out into the country, where there's not as much demand. My driver says we're heading to a bar he knows, but when we pulled into the driveway of this bar, it's anything but. It's literally just someone's house, a 2-story building with like a porch out front. He tells me we arrived and I should wait on the porch for him to get my gear for me. Me being me, I just sort of assume that I either misheard the guy or there been some other kind of miscommunication. Probably on my part, so I do as he says, sitting in a white plastic chair on his house porch, while the owner comes out and starts talking to the driver. But when he sees me, he's absolutely fuming. He starts growling stuff at the driver, pointing at me, and then at the driveway. I didn't need to speak. Wyatt to know that I'm definitely not welcome here. But to my confusion, the two just gone inside and left me be. I'm getting pretty impatient after about 20 minutes goes by, and I'm just sat there waiting on these two guys to come out with my smoke. Worried I'm being ripped off, I get up out of the seat and start wandering towards the doorway of the house, trying to get a look inside. But there's noise at the entrance to the driveway. 4 Vietnamese guys are just staggering up the path, obviously pretty drunk. When they see me, they make the older owner reaction look tame. They're not happy to see me, drunkenly jabbering in Vietnamese and making some pretty aggressive hand gestures. I'm backing off up the porch, hands raised before me in like this I'm not threat to anyone kind of way. They just sense the weakness and ramp it up. One is pushing me, the other one is actually trying to stick his hand in my pockets to rob me, all while the other two are like half gouging them on and half trying to throw punches and kicks at me through the melee. I'm convinced I'm about to rob and battered by a gang of pissed off Wyatts, and that I have to walk hours back to Ho Chi Minh without a penny to my name. That's when I heard it. There was this loud echoing crack that caused the Wyatt lads to scatter away from me. I look up and it's the older owner of the house. He stood there holding a bloody smoking gun in his hair. And then he proceeds to aim it at the gang of Vietnamese lads, screaming stuff in Wyatt at them, and they seem to back off the driveway, absolutely bricking it. I honestly thought he was about to shoot one of them right in front of me, and as much as I'm kind of ashamed to admit it, I sort of wanted him to. I actually found myself wanting this fella to just smoke one of those absolute rat bags, trying to pick on some bloody lonely Westerner. I hate boys, I always have. These fellas just legged it up the drive through, tails between their legs. I'm still shaking as the owner starts talking to me in Wyatt. I have no idea what he's saying, but it's some sort of explanation what just happened. To this day, I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm guessing they were just some neighbourhood thugs come to pick on some weed as I had, who decided they didn't like what they saw, simple as that. With trembling hands I take this huge bag of weed from the owner, who then refuses to take my money off me. He's battering it away, pushing my hand back towards me, in this really overt gesture way, saying, you probably need it right now. And I did. You have no idea how scary it is when something like that happens in a foreign country. The feelings of utter confusion, helplessness, and fear are amplified because you stick out like a sore thumb. The one thing worse than some horrible misfortune is horrible misfortune you're not able to ask for help with. A few years back, my dad passed away pretty suddenly. Heading back to our hometown for the funeral, my two younger sisters and I reunited for the first time in years. It felt amazing. Feeling pretty sibling rivalries just fall away once we realised what was truly important, being a family. We get chatting on the night of the wake, reminiscing and stuff, when we make the joint decision to go on a family vacation together. A few months down the line, and we've somehow managed to get the three of us to agree on a location, somewhere our dad always talked about great affection, a place called Cuba. He'd taken our late mum there on a belated honeymoon a year or two after they got married, and the place was filled with happy memories for them. Maybe, just maybe, we could visit Cuba and feel our connection with our parents' past. So myself and my two sisters, Rose and Jackie, boarded a flight to Toronto, Pearson, and that was headed directly to Cuba, seeking to escape another damp, squib Canadian summer for the sun-soaked beaches for the Caribbean. We were excited beyond words. It was the first real vacation any of us had taken in years, and we really had gone all out for it. But it took about an hour before we wanted to leave. We landed in Cuba, and the weather is looking like it's about to turn. It was very hot, and the sun was sweating, but on the horizon was the biggest, most imitating collection of storm clouds I've ever laid eyes on. I meant they were huge, the kind of things you'd only expect to see in a Hollywood disaster movie. When we met our driver outside the airport, he explained in pretty good English that the sun wasn't expected to hit Cuba too hard, and that it should be cleared out in the morning. He was wrong. Over the course of the 2-hour drive out of Fernando, the storm began to encroach, so that by the time we reached the actual resort, heavy winds has been battering the buildings to the point that roof tiles were scattered over the place. We were getting pretty damn concerned by this point, but the resort bar is still open and still doing good business, thanks to the weather, so we decided to grab a few drinks to pass the time. We sampled pretty much everything the menu had to offer. Big mistake. By the time we leave to go back to our rooms, we were pretty smashed. Spirits are high despite the rain, so we're laughing and joking, singing songs in our bad Spanish, when all of a sudden Rosie slips on a piece of roof tiling and goes down hard. Well, she doesn't exactly slip. According to her, it's an intentional slip of a flip-flop on a damn loose piece of tiling, because her footwear, to become stuff, has kind of whipped her leg back, causing her to land on it with all her weight. We heard the bone snap as clear as day. It was horrific, but not as horrific as Rose's screams. It took about 30 minutes of screams and tears and panicking resort staff before the Cuban ambulance finally showed up. But some people made a big deal about the quality of the Cuban healthcare. But I can assure you, the reality is quite different. The ambulance was literally just a can with a wheelchair in the back. No stretcher, no monitors for fatal signs, nothing like we were used to back in Canada. What's worse, the driver was a doctor himself. The hospital was too short-staffed that their own doctors were forced to drive the ambulance vehicles themselves. Speaking of the hospital, we were horrified to find out the closest clinic was over 45 minutes in a place called Manitas. And when we got there, it was worse than we could have imagined. The whole place is flooded thanks to the rainstorm, and we certainly weren't the only ones to suffer an accident because of it. The place was heavy with wounded and injured people. There were bloody palm prints on the walls, smears of blood on the floor, where people had been dragged inside. The hospital staff were working so hard, but goddamn, if there was just enough of them, every single one was washed off their feet, looking like they were about to snap under the pressure. Rose is still groaning in pain as we wheeled her down through the corridors. The doctor driving the ambulance was very kind, and his English was almost perfect, but he didn't just have the medicine to properly dull Rose's pains. What's worse, we were doing all of this in our bikini tops, nothing but wrapped towels to cover our lower halves. All of these Cubans kept looking at us like crazy gringos or whatever, wondering why we were all dressed for a party in what was obviously a crisis. The whole thing was stressful and embarrassing. We haven't even converted our money yet. When the staff wheeled Rose into the x-ray room, my jaws dropped at how terrible the condition the machine is. It looks like it was made in the 50s or something. It was grinnerous, rusted and looked like it might come crashing down on whoever was unfortunate enough to be under it at any time. Another doctor arrives. They complete the x-ray. Then the doctor tells us they're going to try and set Rose's broken legs without any anesthetic. I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. None of could quite believe what he just said. But in his similarly near perfect English, he explained that the hospital was short on medicine and we were saving it for our higher priority patients. What could be worse than a broken leg? We weren't sure, but the doctor was insistent that Rose would not be receiving any medicine. I cannot begin to describe the screams I heard. Jackie and I became so upset that our hospital security guard forced us to wait outside the room. The only seat available to was next to an unconscious Cuban man. He was barely breathing, his head rolling back in his chair. I was pretty sure he was dying. Finally, after they set her leg, the doctor admires propofol to just knock Rose out cold. They then explain they do not have the tools to perform any complex surgery required to properly set Rose's leg. We needed to get home and fast. The next flight wasn't until 8 p.m. the next night. Add the fact that the only wheelchair on the resort was too small and barely functionable. Our dream vacation originally turned into a waking nightmare of pain, sleeplessness and soul-crushing panic. We made it back in one piece, but Rose now has a permanent steel rod in her thigh and had been strongly advised to gastric bypass surgery in order to reduce her weight. Her weak leg has to support. Please be very, very careful when you're on vacation. Many areas of the world are not nearly as fortunate as we are, and it can be quite as a shock when you're face to face with that kind of situation. I would hate to think that everyone will have to suffer like my sister did, ever again. When I was 12, I attended summer camp to learn how to ride horses. We were going to be away from our parents for 4 or 5 nights. I was very excited because I always wanted to learn how to ride a horse due to my love of animals, but I also was nervous about being away from my family and around strangers for that long. Most of it was amazing and everything I dreamed of. However, the one night we're able to sleep under the stairs is an experience I don't think I'll ever forget. That night we had to leave our bunks and go outside to sleep in tents. I hated tents, but everyone else was going to be doing it, so I figured I'd play along. There were a lot of activities that took place before bed. We were able to sit by a campfire, make s'mores, and tell stories. When it became time for bed, it was 4 of us to get into a tent, and I could already tell I was not going to get much sleep. I just couldn't get comfortable and was wishing it was morning. The other people in my tent seemed to be passed out almost immediately, which left me to sit there and try and count sheep in the dark. There were a lot of tents in a small area due to the fact that everyone in the camp was sleeping outside for the night. I was starting to get a little drowsy when I heard what sounded like footsteps outside my tent. I was right, near the mesh window of the tent, because I tended to get hot and was hoping the cold breeze would help me to sleep. The footsteps then got louder, but I tried to ignore them, presuming it was just a counselor or one of the camp leaders, but when I felt a presence right outside my tent, it was like someone was kneeling right outside my mesh window. I gathered the courage to look outside the window, and there was something outside. I didn't look long enough to see what it was, but something was there. It was silent at first, but then I heard whispering, just murmuring and whispering for minutes and minutes without a break. I couldn't really make out the words because it was so soft, but I could definitely hear something. I thought I could hear the words Saviour, Sacrifice, Wept. I thought I heard the words wept a lot, but like I said, I couldn't really make it out. Every so often it would stop, and I would peek my head out of the sleeping bed to check and see if someone was out there, and the figure was always still there, right outside my window. On and off I could hear the whispering mumbling all night. I tried several times to kick or punch someone in my tent to wake them up, but it didn't work. Eventually, during one of my moments of silence, I must have dozed off. As scared as I was, I have no clue how I was able to fall asleep, even ever so briefly. I checked the window again outside and nothing was there. About 5 minutes later, I heard a loud shriek and a gust of wind. When I woke up the next morning, I asked everyone if they heard or experienced anything similar to what I had experienced in the night. No one had heard or saw anything other than me. I know I wasn't asleep, and that I was absolutely sure I had heard something that night. I don't want to say it wasn't human because nothing gives me that idea. But what type of person would have knelt by our tent and mumbled under their breath the entire night? As scared as I was at that time, I am glad I had never had another experience like that again. Back when I was a student, I went to a university sponsored by a trip in Singapore with over 5 million people with ethnic backgrounds packed onto one small island off the coast of where Singapore is, one of the world's last great city-states. Everything about the trip was perfectly optimal. A pure Sesame assault on a bumpkin from the Midwest. Like me, Singapore is a foodie heaven. Street food hawker culture was practically born there, and the locals take a great deal of pride in traditional recipes that have been around for literally hundreds of years. It's clean. There's very little crime, and despite having a reputation as a heavenly metropolis, the island has a handful of nature reserves and public parklands where the masses and detox from city life for a few hours before returning to the fray. It's paradise, at least. It was, until that night we were there. Being the last night, we decided to head over to Kalake Koi, which happened to be Singapore's main attraction where it came to nightlife. It's a little more upmarket with the kind of clubs that do bottle service and VIP booths, but we figured since we'd been summering all summer that we should go out with a bang. Clark is a bit of a walk from the rented apartment. I was sharing with my other people on our course, so we were stopping into the little bars along the way. By the time we got there, we were smashed. It was already a brilliant night. Singapore never ceased to be a feast for the senses. It was wild. We all drank way too much. And the last thing I remember is getting into a taxi after picking up a bunch of flavoured vodka. I'm not entirely sure how I got into my apartment, but I must have done okay because a couple hours later I woke up fully clothed in my own bed, reeking of vomit and booze. It was my phone, buzzing irritatingly against the bedside table, caller restricted showing up on the screen as I picked up, confused. I answered groggily, asking who was on the other end. I didn't recognize the voice. It certainly wasn't my fellow exchange students, and in very broken English the voice was on the other end asked if I knew two people he named. They were both the names of the people I shared the flat with. When I answered yes, people on the other end began talking in Malay to each other. I couldn't understand what they were saying at all, so I asked again who was calling. The Malay man refused to give me his name or the location of my friends. All he would say was that he was with them and they're alive for now. Those words chilled my blood and my head spinning with the hangover. I assumed the worst. They had been kidnapped and I had gotten blind drunk and lost in Singapore. I had managed to get myself kidnapped by the local mafia. That's when I freaked out. I started shouting down the phone, telling them I was going to call the police and they would be dead men if they lay a hand on my friends. And I was American and I am damn sure that they'd been to prison for the rest of their lives for kidnapped. The guy just laughed. The eeriest, most spine-chilling laugh I've ever heard in my life. What he said next made my head hurt. We are the police, sir. Your friends have been arrested. So it turns out that a pair of numbers stupid decided to their drunken stupor to walk back to the hotel along the waterfront. Unknown to them, they ended up wandering into some highly restricted military areas along Singapore Harbour. How the hell they even got into somewhere like that? That is beyond me, but according to the police, that's what they said. They wandered around like morons, making a bunch of noise and generally being dumbasses, when out of nowhere, a bunch of Singapore Marines surrounded them with weapons drawn and took them into custody. They handed them over to the Internal Security Singapore, equivalent of the FBI, when they're basically going to be charged with spying on a foreign power. They were separated and interrogated. One guy said guns were poured out on them in order to get them fessed up. They were taken into the walls of the port and forced them to explain how they scaled them, even asking if they left any civilians' equipment behind in the harbour. One cop told one friend that the other friend had been confessed had already confessed, so they might as well confess too. All kinds of horrific, very legal crap was pulled out on them, probably just to make an example of couple-drink Americans. When the police hung up on me, I called around the rest of the foreign students to tell them what had happened. It caused a lot of panic. The police over in Singapore can be particularly brutal and cruel, as I knew too well. And there was a rush of ensure that our two arrested friends could have ended up like that kid in North Korea that got beat up so bad that he died. And I'm not comparing the two countries, but I don't know. We are panicking, really panicking. We were calling up every damn police station in Singapore, as well as the American embassy, asking everyone if they knew the fate of our friends. We had also made quite an extensive number of friends and contacts during our time there, and despite what our arrested friends experienced, Singaporeans can expect to be friendly, welcoming, and local. Our local friends went to work for us, using their knowledge to get to the heart of the problem. We think someone messed up the job at the port and that they left the gate open, and rather that admit fault than admit fault, they would get these young students to take the fall. Thankfully, neither of them gave up, because God knows the punishment in Singapore that the time was death. I suppose this story isn't exactly as scary as some of these others, the ones that involve actual local criminals or murder and some like. Maybe none of us were really in any danger, but the feeling of powerlessness we felt that night was pure feeling of realizing just how small we really are, how helpless we can be. I will never forget that. So please, if you go travelling or on vacation to somewhere place far, far from home, be on your best behaviour. Not everywhere is as free or as fair as in the United States, as terrifying as that sounds. I had some free time today, and I thought I would share a story about a scary incident I experienced while on the road with my brother band about 20 years ago. Even though my brother and I shared the same parents, we inherited none of their powers when it came to music. We both started lessons on the piano and guitar around the same age, and my brother showed us from the beginning that played music came to him naturally when it came to me. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get the hang of it. I continued with the guitar all the way into high school, but I realized soon after I was never going to get any better. About the same time, my brother, who was 2 years older than me, got together with one of my friends and some guys from the next town over and formed a band. It wasn't long before they became one of the most popular rock bands in Northern Florida, and the time seemed right to take the show on the road. The initial group of shows stuck to the southern part of the country, Alabama, Georgia, etc. All the old states, since the style was often compared to Skynyrd and the Bowerman, who were honestly two of the biggest influences. This plan seemed to be the most logical and financially sound. The mini tour for the South lasted for about 6 months until the decision to try booking for a few gigs out west was made. Considering I was on the road manager, the task was booking these dates fell upon my shoulders. Still unsure of the reception we receive out there, I only booked a small handful of shows. If I remember correctly, it was no more than 6. Surprisingly, the shows went better than we could ever hoped, and at least for the first 5, everything went out with a hitch. And that would all end at our last show in California. I'm not going to name the town or venue, especially because I don't want them to get a bad name, and I still have to do business with these people. What happened wasn't their fault, at least not that I think, or can prove. If I had picked up from any other managing bands for the last 22 years, it's that you don't burn bridges with the Crubs. They were the lifeblood of the touring band. It would be stupid to piss one of them off like that. I suppose I should tell you what that actually was and how it became to be. We pulled into a town and that afternoon, but since we didn't play until that night, we did a little sightseeing and other tourist things to kill time. That evening we arrived at the club around 8 and rode in our gear. Being the opening band, we didn't get much time of a sound check. Not much more time to tune before they opened the doors. It was a weekday. There wasn't much hope that we would get much of an audience, but to everyone's surprise, including the club manager, the show sold out usually. The opening band is who they are there to see, but we ended up with a really good crowd. You gotta love the internet. I can't imagine how hard it was for the little band back in our dark ages to get a national audience with it. Without it, the guys started just after 10, and they stole the show. After our set, they were all on Crowd 9 because the tour had gone. They hung around and watched the headlining band play. Although I still think we stole the show that night, they were pure professionals and gave us a picture of what a well-fitting and hard-working band could achieve. Once the show had ended and the crowd started to trickle out, I picked up our pay out of the manager and headed straight for the van to stash it. I'd found a place the first day we set to hide it, and that was where I ran into my worst nightmare. The area we had parked was directly behind the club. Despite this, it was dark and quiet. I guess that's why I had chosen it in the first place, but it proved to be an expensive mistake. As I approached the passenger side door of the van, I felt something properly a gun stick in my back, and I felt a deep, calm voice telling me not to move or turn round. The second I heard him, I knew why he was there and what he wanted. I did my best not to move at all, but I was shaking so bad I thought he'd get mad, but he managed to stay calm the whole time. It seemed like an eternity before he spoke again. He told me not to turn around, just pass me the money over his shoulder to him. It was that moment I got the idea that there was more than one thief, even though I never heard or saw another person except the people in the distance walking around the front of the club. Doing what he told me to do, I pushed the envelope over my shoulder and felt it being pulled from my hand. For a brief moment, I didn't want to let go, but logic won me over. I did what he told me to do. At that moment, I could swear he heard him say, "Yes," under his breath, as if answering someone, but I said I never heard anyone else with us. Once I assumed he was pleased with his booty, he instructed me to stay where I was and count slowly to 100 before I moved. He made it clear that if I tried to turn round before then, he would shoot me, if I did. So I did what I was told, and even added another 100 to be safe. When I finally got the courage to move, he was long gone. I was so furious, I felt like a wimp, and the thought of losing all that money made me steam. With my head down, I walked back to the club and told the guys what just happened. They were so cool that they were only concerned if I was okay, but other than just being robbed at gun point, I was great. I headed to the front office and let the club manager in on the robbery. At first, I think I was just pulling his leg, but apparently my white Polo had an indication of my honesty. He called the police, and when they arrived, I told them what they encouraged occurred at the van. Of course, I couldn't give them any description of what he looked like, but I did tell them what I thought. There was another person with him. I still wish that I could have given them more, but I had nothing to offer the investigation. They told us not to hold out any hope that we would get our money back and give us their cards before they left. The only positive to that night was that we still had have the money from our merch sales and what was left of the prior dates. We at least didn't know where I'd hidden the rest, or maybe we didn't care. Once we make it back home from the tour, we decided we'd do certain things different in the future. Unfortunately, there didn't end up being a future for the band. A giant mess of reasons why it all fell apart. Can it be blamed? But it doesn't lessen the sadness of losing such a promising band. Then again, that the story of the rock music, many more great bands have and will be destroyed of silliness of reasons. To this day, I still have no idea how that guy knew I'd just been paid. The chance of the club setting me up was concerned. But no decent club wants to get the reputation of being thieves. The best of the most probable theory that is that he'd been watching me through the whole evening and waited for his chance to pounce, and I gave it to him. It's been almost 20 years since that night, and I do business, but much different than I did then. There are chances I took then that I wouldn't dream of taking it now, and I do everything that I can to be aware of my surroundings, despite the fact I have others around me now to help me. If there's anyone I could recommend you to take away from this experience, I guess it would be to be vigilant and aware of what others are doing around you. If you meet eyes with another person and they're nervous to look away, they're probably up to no good. No matter what your job or class, you can become a target for criminals. Please, just pay attention to others and be careful. Hi everyone, I hope you did enjoy that scary story narration video. I want to do a quick shout out video thing at the end of the video. I want to say shout out to my good friends James and Ryan and John from that I met on holiday. So, and they like the videos, so shout out to you guys as well. Because I don't know if they're watching this or not, but if you are, shout out. But yeah, I hope you did enjoy that video. I don't know when the next Scary No Story narrations will come out. I don't really know yet, because this is taking a lot of time, so you're just gonna have to be patient, I guess. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.